Alrighty, so the days are getting a little bit warmer bit by bit here, and I know we're all starting to dream about the season ahead. And with that, as we get into our planning, there is one super common mistake that I know I made in my first years of gardening, and I see happen all too often. And so what I want to walk through today is exactly what that problem is, the implications of it on our garden, and how we go about avoiding it. So as we get started here, if you have any questions at any point, go ahead, enter those into the comments down below. I answer each and every one of them. I want to be helping you all through the season here. And speaking of the season, what is this problem that I see happening all too often when it comes to planning out the garden? And so as we kind of get into the lead into the springtime here with the days getting longer, there's a lot of excitement. I know all of us are kind of ripping through our seed catalogs, determining and planning out what seeds we want to be growing for the season ahead. And in just a few short weeks, we're going to be starting those seeds, get them underneath the grow lights, and before we know it, they're going to be thriving, kind of chomping at the bit to be moved into their forever home. So we transplant them into the garden beds that we've prepared outside for them. But then we take a look at them and we're like, there's a lot more space in this garden. The seedlings, they look so small. What about all this other space that I could be filling up with other plants and seedlings? And so because they look so teeny and tiny at that moment in time, we maybe buy some more seedlings, or maybe we stuff a couple extras that we have in there to just kind of fill it up a little bit more. But what ends up happening is that a few months later, sitting underneath the sun, being well fed and well watered, these plants really begin to take off. And next thing we know, that garden bed is absolutely bursting at the seams. And it looks kind of good because it's like, hey, look at all this amazing stuff in the garden. But in reality, this is one of the biggest problems that I see is overcrowding gardens and not giving the plants sufficient space to be thriving all through the season. So while it looks good at first, there's actually 3 concerns that are kind of beginning to show up as a result. And so I want to walk through those and then talk through how we can go about avoiding this problem from happening in our garden. So the first concern or problem that is likely to arise by having an overcrowded garden and not giving our plants the sufficient space for them to thrive is that we are likely to decrease the airflow throughout the plants, creating a very humid environment. And when we have a very humid environment, the likelihood of disease setting in is way higher. So on our squashes and our cucumbers, it's quite likely that we'll see powdery mildew significantly earlier on in the season than if they had a little bit more space with that airflow going throughout them. And then say with our potatoes or our peppers or our tomatoes, that lack of airflow is the ideal conditions for blight to be setting in. And I've learned this one firsthand. So a couple of years ago, as we're getting towards the end of the season, I wanted to build a little bit of a greenhouse around my tomato trellis to help keep some of that warm air in. But what ended up happening was it just cut off all of the air circulation. There was no airflow, and nearly immediately, within probably about a week, all of those plants had late season blight on them, and I lost the entirety of the crop. So we really want to make sure that we have some airflow coming through our plants. Now, the second piece that's going to happen is that some of those plants are just going to grow a little bit better than the others. And when they do that, they're going to put up a foliage canopy up above them, and that's going to result in the shorter plant not getting any of the sunlight and ending up just really quite stunted and smaller and not thriving whatsoever. This happened for me this past season as a little bit of an experiment because I wanted to see like what are the actual implications. And so I planted 3 kale plants right together, and what ended up happening was that one of them absolutely took off and the other 2 were just sitting kind of beneath it, not nearly getting enough sun to really thrive. So they're not going to grow that great regardless. And so that leads into the third kind of concern here, and that is that first, they're not even growing all that great, but on top of that, their roots are beneath the surface and they're drawing up nutrients, taking them away from our plants that are thriving. So now not only are these plants that we've tried to squeeze in there not doing all that great, but they're actually stealing away nutrients from those that did grow a little bit bigger, a little bit better, and are thriving a little bit more earlier on in the season. So these concerns we want to take into consideration, and the good news is that there's a really easy way to avoid this, and we've built it all into our garden planning guide. So just before we dive into that, for those of you that I have not met before, I'm Jordan from Mind and Soil, where we're looking to introduce 1 million individuals to mindful gardening. So if you're looking for more peacefulness, more calmness, more restoration in your life, then I really encourage you to subscribe, because we put out new videos just like this every single week to be helping you feel comfortable and confident in the garden, getting your hands dirty, and tapping into those mental health benefits of gardening. So how do we go about kind of avoiding this spacing and overcrowding problem? Well, in our garden planning guide, which can be downloaded down in the link below, there is a space planner that outlines every single vegetable that you're likely to be growing in your garden this season and how much space is required for it. And if you haven't checked out our video on how to plan the perfect garden, it's up above here, and that's going to take you through this whole guide step by step so that you get it all absolutely perfect for the unique garden and growing zone that you're in. But coming back to this piece on spacing, let's say that I wanted to be growing kale this coming season. Well, all that I need to do now is look up kale in the space planner, and I can see how many squares in terms of square feet are required for it, and it's only 1 square foot that's required. Then how many kale plants can I fit into that square foot? And that's only 1 as well. So now all that I do is I go back to my drawing and I simply find a 1 foot square box, and I know that I can fit a kale plant in there perfectly, and that's going to have the perfect amount of space for it. When you transplant it, it's going to look so small and like you could fit so many more in there, but trust me, believe me on this one, it will be the right amount of spacing. And then I go to the next plant that I absolutely can't wait to grow, and let's say basil is what it's going to be. Once again, I go into my space planner, I look up basil, I find it. How many squares are required? Only 1. And how many basil plants can I fit into that square? 4. Now, why can I fit 4 basil plants into that square? The reason behind that is because it's a much smaller plant than kale. And so now I just go back to my drawing and I add in basil for each one of those squares, and I remember that each one of those squares is going to give me 4 basil plants. So if I've got 4 squares drawn, that's actually going to end up being 16 basil plants. So let's grab one more just to make sure that it's fully making sense here, and let's grab one of our larger plants, such as, say, zucchini. So I go over to my space planner, I look up the zucchini, and how many squares are required for zucchini? That is 4 squares. So they're going to take up a lot of space. And how many zucchini plants can I fit into that set of 4 squares? Only 1. So once again, I go back to my space planner, I add in zucchini, dedicating 4 squares for it, and I know that that is going to give it the perfect amount of space for it to be thriving this coming season. So if you utilize our guide for planning the perfect vegetable garden, and specifically the space planner to ensure that each of them have the appropriate amount of space, I guarantee that those plants are going to thrive and do much, much, much better than if we tried to stuff way too much in there. I'd love to hear any questions that you might have, so let me know those down in the comments below. That's everything for today here, folks. I hope this has been helpful. I can't wait to catch you on the next one, and go get those hands dirty.